It was supposed to be a quiet weekend by the lake, a chance for my family and me to escape the noise of the city and enjoy the cabin we'd worked so hard to build. But instead of peace, I pulled up to chaos. My cabin, the place filled with years of memories, was nothing more than a pile of broken wood and shattered windows. Standing there in disbelief, I tried to make sense of the scene until a smug HOA board member appeared, arms crossed, telling me they'd legally demolished my home for unpaid HOA fees. Fees I didn't even owe, because my property wasn't part of their HOA in the first place. The arrogance in their tone lit a fire in me. They thought they could push me around, bully me with fake rules, and strip away something that wasn't theirs to touch. What they didn't know was that my family isn't exactly the type you can intimidate. We've dealt with far more than power-hungry neighbors with clipboards and fake authority. What these HOA bullies had unknowingly stepped into was a storm much bigger than they could imagine. I looked at the destruction, and I wasn't just angry, I was calm. Too calm. Because what they didn't realize was that my entire family has spent years in service, not just to our country, but in one of the most unshakable agencies in the world, the CIA. They thought this was about a cabin. They thought this was about HOA fees. But it was about to become something far bigger. As the HOA members smirked, confident they'd won, they had no clue who they were really messing with. And that's when the real story began. The HOA board member kept going on about rules and community standards, waving a folder full of papers he clearly thought would scare me. But the more he talked, the clearer it became that this was all smoke and mirrors. My cabin sat on private land my family had owned for decades, long before this neighborhood HOA even existed. Yet, they acted like they had power here, as if intimidation and a few fancy documents could erase history. As I stood there, taking it all in, my mind raced back to how much this place meant to us. My parents bought the cabin when I was a kid, and every summer we spent weekends fishing on the lake, cooking over a fire, and sharing stories on the porch. It wasn't just a cabin, it was our anchor, a reminder of who we were when the world outside felt too heavy. Seeing it destroyed wasn't just an attack on property, it was personal. What the HOA didn't know was that every member of my family carried skills most people couldn't even imagine. My father specialized in intelligence gathering, my mother was trained in negotiation and strategy, and even my younger brother had a background in operations. We weren't just a family, we were a team. And no matter how careful the HOA thought they had been, we could already see the holes in their story. But that raised even more questions. Why would they risk everything to demolish a cabin they had no claim to? Why target us so specifically? Something didn't add up, and it felt like there was more to this than just HOA fees. As the dust settled over the wreckage, I realized this wasn't just a neighborly dispute. This was the beginning of something far bigger, and we weren't about to back down. I couldn't shake the feeling that the HOA's excuse about unpaid fees was nothing more than a cover. No one goes to the trouble of hiring a demolition crew, filing fake notices, and then standing smugly in the ruins unless there's something bigger at stake. My brother noticed it too. He picked up a scrap of paper from the debris, part of a survey map that didn't belong to our property records. It had markings on it, circles around the lake area, and notes scribbled in handwriting that wasn't official at all. That discovery opened another layer to the conflict. Maybe this wasn't just about control or petty HOA power games. Maybe someone wanted the land itself, and the HOA was being used as a convenient shield. My mother, always the strategist, quietly reminded us that real estate near private lakes had become a hot target for developers. If that was the case, this wasn't just our fight, it was a calculated move to push us out, and likely others too. But there was something strange about the way the HOA president kept glancing over his shoulder, like he was waiting for someone else to show up. He wasn't as confident as he pretended. He stammered when asked direct questions and dodged anything about who had authorized the demolition. That kind of behavior only made us more certain that someone higher up was pulling the strings. Meanwhile, neighbors began to gather around the wreckage, whispering, some pretending not to notice. A few looked guilty, as if they knew more than they wanted to admit. One older couple even tried to warn me quietly, saying this wasn't the first time the HOA had gone too far. Their words left me with a chill. If this had happened before, Then, what exactly were we stepping into this time? The more we uncovered, the heavier the air around us felt. My brother's discovery of that map kept replaying in my mind. Circles, lines, and coded notes that clearly weren't meant for the public eye. Whoever had drawn it had plans far bigger than a lakeside cabin, and the fact that it ended up buried in the rubble of our home was no accident. Someone wanted us gone, and they wanted us gone fast. The whole president tried to dismiss our questions, but his nervous glances told a different story. When I pressed him on who approved the demolition order, his voice cracked. He muttered something about just following instructions and then clammed up as if he'd already said too much. That single phrase told me everything. He wasn't the mastermind. He was just a pawn in a much larger game. As the sun started setting, the scene around the ruins grew tenser. Neighbors lingered in small clusters, whispering as though they were watching a show play out, but none of them dared step forward. Their silence only made the mystery thicker. Were they afraid of the hoe, or of whoever was behind it? Either way, their eyes avoided mine whenever I looked at them, as if they knew more than they were willing to admit. Then, just as we were piecing together the fragments of the map, a pair of black SUVs rolled up to the edge of the lake road. Their windows were tinted, and their engines idled with an unsettling calm. The whole president froze in place, his face drained of color. He didn't have to say anything. We all understood instantly that these weren't ordinary visitors. Whoever had been pulling the strings was finally stepping into the light. And that was when the real confrontation was about to begin. The moment those black SUVs pulled up, the entire mood shifted. The neighbors who had been lingering quickly scattered, as if they wanted no part of whatever was about to unfold. The whole president, who had spent the whole afternoon acting smug, now looked like a cornered animal. He wouldn't meet my eyes, and his hands shook as he tried to gather his papers. It was clear he wasn't just afraid of me, he was terrified of whoever was in those vehicles. The doors opened slowly, deliberately, and two men in dark suits stepped out. They didn't say a word at first, just scanned the scene, the wrecked cabin, the scattered debris, the shaken board members, and then turned their attention to us. Their silence was more unnerving than any threat. My instincts told me they weren't just lawyers or developers. There was something calculated in the way they moved, something too precise. My brother caught the same detail I did. These weren't ordinary men. Then came the real twist. One of the men pulled out a folder and began flipping through photographs, not of the property, but of us. Family pictures, surveillance shots, even images taken from what looked like inside our cabin before it was destroyed. That's when my mother's expression hardened. This wasn't about land value or hoe control anymore. Someone had been watching us closely, and the demolition was only the first move. The realization hit like a wave. If they had been tracking us, then this entire hoe scheme was just a cover for something much larger, something connected to our past. My family's history with intelligence work had clearly resurfaced, and now it wasn't just about saving a cabin, it was about protecting ourselves from a threat that already knew far too much. The sight of those photos changed everything. My family exchanged glances, and without saying a word, we slipped into the quiet rhythm we'd always known, a rhythm built from years of working together under pressure. My father stepped forward, calm but firm, and asked the men directly what their real goal was. The lead agent finally spoke, his voice even and unsettling. He admitted the hoe had been used as a front, a convenient tool to push us out so they could take control of the land around the lake. But the real shock came when he said the lake itself hid something buried long before my parents ever bought the cabin, something they believed we had knowledge of. That was the moment everything clicked. The maps, the strange survey markings, the rush to demolish the cabin, it all pointed to whatever was hidden beneath the water. And now, these men weren't asking. They were demanding. The whole board had just been pawns, but the true players had stepped onto the board. But then came the unexpected twist. As the tension reached its peak, my brother pulled out the fragment of the survey map we'd found in the wreckage. Holding it up, he asked if this was what they were so desperate for. The men froze. Their reaction gave them away. They didn't have the full picture. They needed us. That shift changed everything. Suddenly, we weren't just the targets, we were the ones holding the missing piece. My mother leaned in and whispered just loud enough for them to hear. "Then I guess this isn't your game after all." The standoff hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. But one thing was clear. The battle for the lake wasn't over. It had only just begun. The standoff by the lake ended in silence, each side measuring the other. Those men in suits realized they had no leverage without the missing map, and after a tense pause, they retreated back into their black SUVs. The whole president, pale and trembling, didn't stick around either. He slipped away quietly, leaving his folder of fake documents scattered in the dirt. For the first time all day, the air around the wreckage felt lighter, even though my cabin still lay in ruins. In the days that followed, the truth unraveled. Neighbors began sharing what they knew, finally brave enough to admit the HOA had been pressuring others too, using threats of fees and rule violations to scare people into giving up land. Some had lost small parcels near the lake, while others had just paid to avoid trouble. But our stand had exposed their scheme, and with the photos and documents we collected, it became clear this wasn't just about our cabin. It was about greed and hidden agendas. My family, with our background and intelligence, did what we knew best. We connected the dots, shared the evidence with the right people, and made sure those pulling strings behind the HOA could no longer hide. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, but it was enough to protect the lake and the community around it. Looking at the cabin's ruins one last time, I felt a mix of loss and pride. We would rebuild, but more importantly, we had stood together as a family and uncovered the truth. The lake was safe for now, and the neighbors knew they didn't have to be afraid anymore. Sometimes, the real fight isn't about buildings or fees. It's about standing your ground when someone tries to take what isn't theirs. And that's a lesson I won't forget.